Israel. I think Israel was an important part of it. But, you know, as I finished reading that, I said, well, these guys are really going to be criticized for this, but they didn't even mention the worst of it. And the worst of it, in my opinion, is the USS Liberty. Now, how many of you have heard of the USS Liberty? Okay, a couple. This was a U.S. naval warship that was off the coast of Israel during the 1967 war. It was an intelligence collector, and it was collecting signals not only from the Russians in Cairo and elsewhere, the Egyptians, but also the Israelis. The Israelis knew it was there. It was in international waters the whole time. But on June 8th, in broad daylight, some Israeli aircraft reconnoitered the USS Liberty, saw the great big American flag, went back. 2 hours later, Israeli fighter bombers came and did their best to sink it. Then torpedo boats came and tried to sink it. 2.5 hours, the battle raged. Finally, the ship limped back to port in Malta. They didn't sink it. Now, the first thing that those who survived, 34 U.S. sailors were killed. 171 were severely injured. And when the ones that made it back woke up the next morning, they were visited by U.S. naval officers of superior rank and told, if you so much as mention that the Israelis did this deliberately, even to your wife, you're subject to court-martial. We learned that during the battle, one of the Navy fellows on the Liberty was able to get in touch with the 6th Fleet headquarters, and the commanding admiral sent fighter bombers to do battle with whatever was attacking the USS Liberty. Halfway there, they were called back by order of the President of the United States, Lyndon Johnson, and Secretary McNamara. The whole thing was covered up. Now, why, you ask me, would the Israelis want to do something like that? 3 reasons. One I'm sure of, and that is that the Israelis were about to go up on the Golan Heights, take those heights from Syria. They had promised us that they wouldn't do that. They just didn't want us to know about it beforehand. There was no way that they could do that without communicating with their forces up there. They knew we would intercept the communications, and so they didn't want that to happen. Secondly, they had just captured about 1,200 Egyptian soldiers in the Sinai. They had asked them to dig their own graves, and they shot them. Thirdly, they thought that we were communicating with the Egyptians using one of the CIA stations in the Middle East, with the Liberty actually intercepting the initial message. That was wrong. That wasn't happening, but they thought it was. So those were the 3 reasons why they tried to sink the ship. Now, what's my point here? My point here is simply this, that this was suppressed by Congress, by the executive, by everybody. The Navy bristled, but it kowtowed and allowed this thing to be suppressed for many years. More recently, Admiral Thomas Moorer, who at one point was our the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, did his own inquiry and got some of the Navy lawyers who had been asked to lie to come forward and admit what had happened, and now it's pretty much out in the open. Amy Goodman had it on her show. But it's not well known to the American people. So here I am just finishing reading this very scholarly study of the power of the Israel lobby, and I'm saying, my goodness, he didn't even mention the Liberty. Now, I don't know why they didn't mention the Liberty, but it seems to me that in 1967, the Israelis learned that they could literally get away with murder, and that not even if they killed 34 of our sailors would we object. And that's a very parlous kind of alliance to have, if you want to call it an alliance. It's the kind of entangling alliance that George Washington warned about, where the perceived needs of one party are automatically accepted as the perceived needs of the other. That's kind of a long-winded answer, but it's something that doesn't come out, but needs to, because the biggest problem in the Middle East right now is the way this president reversed the policy of 4 decades, where we tried to play the role of an honest broker between the Palestinians and the Israelis. This president, his very first National Security Council meeting on the 30th of January 2001 said, that's for the birds. We know who our friends are. We're going to go with Ariel Sharon. Anybody know Ariel Sharon? Colin Powell says, well, yeah, I know him, but you know, I don't know if you want to unleash Ariel Sharon. And the president says, that's all right, we've decided to do that. A little show of force is not a bad thing sometimes. We'll see what happens. Well, we've seen what happens, right? And you know, here's Colin Powell, he's a Secretary of State, and this is the first he knows about this decision.
For example, instead of having a guard sitting on the wall with Gaza, that will shoot at any Palestinian that comes near to the wall, they have a special something weird there that looks like, I don't know, coming from outer space. It's like a sphere. And there are a lot of surveillance cameras inside. And then there are women who sit in a base, an army base, inside Israel, far from there, who control these cameras. And when they see something moving, they can shoot it from afar. So they have a room full of people who just control this entire section of the wall with Gaza. The system is called Ro'a Yora, which means seeing shooting in the feminine, because it's all women. And it's quite obscene if you think about it.